Welcome back to the Section K podcast. My name is Caden Rutherford. I'm joined with Cody Hedlund and Colburn Blue Larson. A topic that has generated a lot of buzz and has been pretty popular amongst NCHA members, and whether it's discussed on Facebook or discussed at the cutting, is the new leveled two-division class structure. Here at the Section K podcast, as some of you may know, we have our own resident non-pro committee member, Mr. Cody Hedlund. We thought we've discussed the two-class structure a little bit here and there on some previous episodes, but we kind of wanted to dive into that a little deeper. So, Cody, could you kind of explain that briefly to the people?
I'd love to. So, basically, we've been talking about a leveled two-division class structure within the non-pro committee for a couple years now, and we talked about it at the convention. It was brought up. We talked about it in our closed session meeting, and we decided that we wanted to try to propose an idea to help the NCHA sport of cutting and the NCHA and the sport of cutting grow. And basically the things that were on our mind when we created this was, one, making everything simpler. Having the open leveled exactly how it's proposed in the other leveling proposal that's been put in, but then combining the amateur and non-pro into one class and adding levels to it to facilitate for the large amount of entries that are now going to be in the class.
And just before we go any further, I just want to ask this question because I feel like as soon as people hear combine the amateur and the non-pro, they automatically think, or they automatically assume, and I mean, whenever I first heard this proposal, before I did any research or understood the proposal, you hear the combine the amateur and the non-pro, and immediately people think that,
oh, you're doing away with the amateur,
or someone in the 50,000 amateur that's won 20,000 is going to be competing against someone in the Riders Hall of Fame or someone that's won $750,000. And just so we're clear, that is not how this leveled two-class system would be, correct?
Correct. There is 5 levels, and the way we made each level was by using just the member numbers, not any entry numbers of classes or anything like that, just the member LTEs. And when we got to looking at it, we wanted to change where the levels were so it made it more fair for everybody, and you would be competing against people that have won the same amount of money that you have, regardless of where they grew up, how they grew up, or anything else. You would be competing against somebody in level 1. You would be competing against everybody that had won less than $25,000, and so on and so forth. And we're going to be putting out a deal on Facebook that you guys can look at all these slides and everything. But there's 5 levels to the merged division that will allow everybody a place to come cut against people that have won the same amount of money that they have. Completely leveled on money won. And we felt that it was the fairest way to do that. But then on the other hand, you got to realize that there are people that grow up in this, and there are kids that grow up in this. And you wanted to have a place for somebody that, an amateur that didn't come into it until later on in life, maybe just got on a cutting horse in their 40s. And you have a 20-year-old kid that's been cutting since he was little. Well, then we made these bottom 2 levels that are under 75,000 one for it's between 25,000 and 75,000 for the second level, which would be level 2, obviously. And those are protected because you can never go back in them once you graduate out of them. So because we wanted to have a
less
protected
than 25K and the 25 to 75K, correct?
Correct. And we wanted to have a protected level that those guys could compete on their own.
True
and have
entry level.
A true entry-level class. And then we just moved all the other leveling caps around to where they encompass more people. But this is all the members. These are all the owners that don't show horses, that just own great horses or whatever. So we did this as just like a rough draft, if you will. Like it was a rough draft of a proposal of an idea that we thought could work to help the NCHA. And that's all it was. But basically it follows the same leveling proposal that has already been implemented and talked about and done. It's just making everything a lot more simpler and streamlined to where everybody still has a place to cut, and we can keep our numbers up, because when we keep our numbers up, it's when the purse stays up.
Agree. And to me, it seems that folks are not really driven away by the idea of this, but it's like, to me, this is more of an entry-level way of things than, say, the current amateur is, for instance. So let's use the 50 am, for example. You can surely everyone uses that as the entry-level example. I mean, say
Correct.
what you want, but it's not. It's not an entry-level class. At any aged event with the age requirement and the age loophole or whatever, 60 and above rule, there's folks that are showing in the 50,000 amateur at aged events that have won hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars. So for me and someone whose brother and dad and other family members that are complete novices to the sport are true amateurs, it's just super hard. And the current leveled or not leveled structure, I should say, the way the 50 amateur is now, it's just not a way to grow the sport, in my opinion. Like, it's hard for me to want to enter my dad or my brother when they're showing against someone that's 62. Sure, they're a little older than them, but they've got tons of show experience under their belt. And to me, I don't think it's right to have someone is a true beginner competing against someone. So I think this two classes, I mean, the bottom two levels, if you can't ever roll back in them or there's no age requirement, I mean, there's your way to get folks in the show pen and get not only new people, but we need to start targeting people that already have horses, which are our lopers and our people that work behind the scenes. I mean, those folks also want to show, like, let's start making it to where it's not only accessible, but it makes sense for them to buy a horse and make that commitment and
B, show a horse.
Yeah, and B, show a horse and actually take the reins and
get to experience what they're working
exactly. I mean,
yep.
Sure, it's one thing to be in the back and get to lope all these great horses, but I mean, at some point, I mean, you know how it is, Colburn. You know how it is too. Like, at some point, I'm sure you get tired of just working, and you eventually want to lope one or prepare one that you're eventually going to go down there and compete on.
Cody, how does the revolving door work for the leveling in the two-class structure? And being that the top end, the fifth level, is LTE 300,000 plus, and how many years goes by before you can move back down to level 3?
So I'm happy you asked that, because that's another confusing part to this deal. But another thing that we tried to do when making this two-class structure is, just like you said, is bringing people in that are working and being a part of this industry but don't get a chance to show. Also bringing people back in that have left, because there's a lot of people that have left cutting and quit cutting and started doing something else for whatever reason it may be, and they come back and they're not as competitive because they don't do it as much as they used to, and as much as it requires to be in the top level or a higher level that they were in. So we added the revolving door to allow people, if they wanted to come back in to cutting, and as well as people that maybe had a really, really good horse one year that pushed them out of a level, but they weren't quite ready to be out of that level, and they can also roll back as well. And we put that in there so it's based on the top 100 riders from the previous year. If a rider is not on the top 100 list, then they may drop down a level. So that's why we added that. And if you're in the top 100 list, then you compete wherever you're eligible and you can't go back down. But if you're not and you hadn't competed or you had a down year, it's an incentive for you to get back in and also not be bombarded with being in the top level of the non-pro.
And I think that right there is the really important part of this being a pretty good idea. I just think that this helps everybody out so much because of what you're saying there of some people either money-wise or not, or the horsepower, horse flesh, consistently getting it. There's very few that are consistently at the top all the time. There's just a handful of those people. But doing it this way, those other people that are competitive, but sometimes just don't have the horsepower. It allows them just to a chance to keep going and keep competing.
I'd like to know y'all's thoughts on this, but I think the numbers and I don't want to use barriers, but
Caps.
the caps. I think that these are the perfect numbers in my opinion. I think the mid-level is exactly 75 to 1. That's exactly where I am, and that's exactly where I would classify myself right now. Is like I'm just kind of middle of the road. I've won literally right smack dab between 75 and 150K, and I think that would be actually a pretty level playing field with pretty much everyone that has won that. If you've won that, whether it's all weekend earnings, if you've won $100,000 in weekend earnings, you're pretty damn tough.
You know how to cut.
You have seen and been a whole hell of a lot of places, and if you've won $100,000 in aged event money,
you know how to cut.
Yep, you're not an amateur anymore.
Correct.
You might be classified as an unlimited amateur, but you're not a beginner. You're not a novice at this deal anymore.
Well, in these caps, when we made them, we took them strictly on member data. We didn't use any entries, and I said that before. But so once we get the entry date, like I said, this was a rough draft. Once we get all that in, these caps can change as well because we want them to be – obviously we want the top level to be the top level. And that brings me to another goal that we had when we were creating this was we wanted to protect the top level because everybody comes and competes at the fraternity every year for that $200,000 check. Well, it's not quite that anymore, but everybody competes at the fraternity because of that big money at the top open level. And that's what we've seen for years and years. And the more money we added there, the more entries we had in the open. And then it slowly declined, and when the entries declined, so did the purse. So those were our three, and there was other things we tried to do and make sure we took care of when we created this was entry level and being able to get back if you've had a down year or quit or used to do it when you were younger and then went and got a real job and now have a real job and want to get back into it. And the other thing is everybody is a non-pro, and all amateurs are non-pros, but not all non-pros are amateurs. And it gets confusing. To have a class without that kind of segregation makes everything so much simpler. Because now when this happens, it's going to create that hub that we've been spending a lot of money on for years. It's going to allow this to be so much easier for that program to run our whole situation and keep track of everybody's eligibility.
Well, and I just think, too, with the current format and the way the non-pro entries are, I think both of you guys can vouch. It ain't cheap to go enter the 4-year-old non-pro. Obviously
No.
in Fort Worth it's not, but even at the Cotton Stakes or even at the Bash or even at Vegas, you're looking at spending a pretty penny to go compete in. Even the mid-level of the non-pro, it's not no $800 like it is in the unlimited amateur and the 50 am. So to me, like I was saying earlier, we need to capitalize on folks that already have horses. We need to make sure that every single trainer whose kid or whose wife or whoever it is that lives on the place is has a horse and is going to show and wants to show, and it's feasible for them to show, because right now it's not feasible for, I talked to Ashley Flynn. She's one of my good friends up at the Cotton Stakes. Her daughter, Madison, everybody's seen her at the shows. She was dying to show. She works her tail off at all the cuttings, behind the scenes, getting amateur horses ready, doctoring, feeding, whatever Sean and Ashley need her to do, she's doing it, doing her schoolwork. And it's like, Ashley's like, I want to give her more opportunities to show, but it's like, y'all both know, being a trainer's kid, your dad has to find a good deal on a horse. Your dad has to make the horse. It's just like there's so many things that go into showing as a trainer's kid or as a trainer's wife that not many people think about, in my opinion. And I don't know, it's like we got to make it easier on the people that are already in this, and make it easier and more feasible to get those folks in the show pen on a regular basis and not just on special occasions.
Cody, what do you think is the most beneficial thing about the two-class structure?
Simple as easy. When you take out all the gray area of where you grew up, what your dad did when you were growing up, what you were into as a kid, how much time you really spent at the barn or how much time you didn't. And it makes everything easier. There's other associations that are doing this. Other cutting associations are doing this. In the U.S. and the American Cutting Horse Association, they have a two-class structure. And in the World Cutting Horse Association, there's an amateur division, but it's only restricted by LTEs, how much you've won. So trainers, family members can show in it as long as their LTEs are less than 50,000. And so when people say, well, the non-pro committee is self-serving and we're just trying to do this and do that and we're going to go cut somewhere else.
That's a little extreme.
It is extreme, but the same the other associations that you're going to be going to are doing the same exact thing that we're trying to implement.
And again, it is a proposal.
And at the end of the day, even though I said this last time, it was a proposal.
Yeah.
And we talked about it in our closed session meeting. It was talked about in the amateur meeting. It got brought up in there. And it also got brought up in the general membership meeting. That means all y'all.
If you're at the convention.
If you're at the convention. Which we
I
were.
just think that
and it was brought up there too, and they told them that we talked about it in our closed session meeting when Sherry recapped what our closed session meeting was about. And then we went ahead and came up with the proposal. So
I think it is just something that is not to be just ignored. I think a lot of people just need to be open-minded about looking at what all is being proposed on it and not just ignoring it because there's one thing that you don't like about it. And I'm not saying yay or nay on it. I just meaning be open-minded to I feel like something that could potentially be very beneficial to the NCHA.
Well, and beneficial to the NCHA and the cutting horse market in, say, 25 years.
Yeah, because at the rate that cutting's going right now, our kids aren't going to be.
No, absolutely not.
Or at least the NCHA.
No.
But that's one thing that people don't even realize about this proposal is we disagreed on it amongst ourselves before we ever came up with it. We had the levels and we went through and Sherry got us all these spreadsheets of where everybody was at and LTEs and all this stuff. And we bounced these levels around a lot to try to come up with a happy medium for everybody. And like I said, when this entry data unless the petition that keeps getting passed around gets signed and people don't want the two-class structure anymore, when we get entry data, we can vet it and see if it's going to work, because we don't know if it's going to work. When we proposed it, yes, we came up with an idea that we thought would work. Does that mean it's the correct idea? Absolutely not. But at least it's a step in somewhat of a direction so we can get everything figured out here. Because obviously, as if you have Facebook, or if you've been on a cutting horse in the past 2 days, you probably know there's a lot of turmoil about all this.
Yep. Well, and I think the misconception, and we've addressed it already, but it's like too many people think that whatever side you're on, that one side's trying to take something from the other. And I mean, I get the whole discontent amongst amateurs of not wanting to compete against, I mean, Cody Headland or Megan Miller or someone that is won $1 million or is approaching that milestone. But I mean, it's not, do your research before you hop on Facebook or you start running your mouth about something that you don't know about. And that's really all I have to say about that.
I didn't want to show against Marianne Rapp and Sandy Benelli and all the greats when I was growing up. I've been cutting on the non-pro level since I was 16 years old. That's 13 years of solid cutting against the best in the non-pro division. I didn't want to, but I had to. And that's fine.
Same.
I'm fine with it. I'm not mad at
I
anybody.
wanted to a little bit.
Well,
I mean,
exactly. We wanted to, but we had
but
we
there
had
was no-
to,
yeah, there
but
was
we
no
wanted
option.
to.
There was
But
no option.
Exactly. I went from the 2,000 limit to the 20 non-pro to the non-pro. And you guys might not recognize these names, but showing against Bobby Kennedy's, Lee Brooks, Karen Brooks. I mean, just people that I was in contact with, Jimmy Kemp, Mary Jo Milner. I mean, I had to compete against those, and I was a 16-year-old kid. And that's, at the end of the day, that's discouraging for a lot of people. Well, that's why, I mean, we took all these things into account when we came up with it.
But let me ask you this one question. Aren't we cutting horse competitors? Isn't
Yes,
that
sir.
the whole name of the game? That
amen.
we're competitors to compete against one another? I mean, the way I was raised, I played a whole lot of select baseball and traveled a whole lot playing, whether it was Dallas or San Antonio or Omaha, Nebraska. And
You competed against kids your same age.
yeah, and if you got out of the pickup or got off the bus and you were mentally out of it, you might as well not even put your spikes on and run out on the field because you're going to get your ass handed to you. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you're worried about, A, what the other team's doing or what kind of bats they have or what kind of spikes they have or if they all have matching Rawlings gloves or they look the part, you know? I mean, if you're worried about that, just don't even lace them up and
You're
go
beat
out there.
before you step on that
Exactly.
field.
And to me, someone that – I mean, I started showing in the aged events right off the bat. I mean, I showed a year or two in the youth, didn't really know what I was doing, and then I went to college, and I got to either show all the time on the weekends. And, I mean, if you've listened to this show enough, you know I love football way too much to sacrifice my weekends to go sit at a weekend cutting. Shout out all the weekend cutters. Mad respect to all the folks that are slaving away and sweating away on the weekend trail. But I just wasn't going to do that, and I started – going to aged events, and I started not only entering in the amateur. Before the unlimited came along, I would enter the non-pro too, just to get that extra run, because the only way I was going to get better was going down there, crossing that timeline, sweaty saddle blankets. I mean, that was the only way I was going to get better, and that's how I realized that I could actually compete in that division. Made some non-pro finals here and there, have won some non-pro events here and there, whether it be the limited or the mid-level, and it's possible. It's doable. I mean, you buy good horses, you work hard, sky's the limit, baby. Anything is possible.
Well, and like Cody said, I think I was either 16 or 17 when I showed at my first aged event, and I think I was 18 or 19 when I showed at my first futurity. And, both times, the first time I showed at an age event, I won it on the limited 5-6 non-pro on DS Miss Wilson Freckles. And then the first time I showed at the futurity, I made the futurity finals. And I feel like at both times, just in my head mentally, I was ready to show at an aged event. But I didn't show earlier on growing up. Even though I showed a lot, it was a lot more weekend shows because, obviously my parents are paying, and they're not going to take me to an aged event and let me show at an aged event at the price it is if I'm not ready to compete against the big dogs. And I'm going in there and competing against the the best the first time I'm going to show the age events. And granted, I had showed a lot before I ever showed an age event, and so I had experience that way. But dang sure didn't show at age events at an early age just because I was probably just not ready to do that.
And all those horses that you just listed, CBL, all those horses were raised on your ranch, were they not?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Every single one of them. The money that I have won, they would be horses that either we raised or like the stud we had for a long time, Wilsonsville Freckles. My parents bought a bunch of younger ones right when we bought him. And but a majority of the money I've earned at age events, horses that we raised on our place, and not the points that I won in the youth. There'd be a lot of the points that weren't horses that we raised. But yeah, thanks for pretty much all the money I've won at age events is horses we raised.
And see, that's you guys are talking about the whole situation right here. Is everybody comes from somewhere different. I was a lot more like Colburn. I grew up in this. My dad's been a horse trainer ever since I was a kid. 90% of the money that I've won has been on horses that we have raised and we have created and we have trained. And yes, there was some horses in the beginning that we bought, weekend horses, and shout out Shut Up and Cut, one of the best horses I'll probably ever get to ride. But everybody's story is different. And making these adjustments to our association, you have to take that into account. You're not going to be the same. I mean, you live right here in Witt, Texas, and everybody has a different story that is in Garner of how they came about it and where they came from and how they're into cutting. But there's a lot of people here that are into it. And you got to take everybody's situation into account and figure out the best one that works for everybody. Because like I said before too, this is going to hurt and it's going to help people. Some people are going to have to give something up. Some people are going to get extra. But at the end of the day, we have to do it for what's best for NCHA as a whole and keep striving to make everybody happy. And everybody in the world needs a place to cut.
Amen.
Hashtag grow cutting.